Welcome to another explainer. All right, today we are doing something really fascinating. We're decoding the hidden psychological forces that drive more than 330 million people. We are basically looking at a complete breakdown of the American mindset, peeling back all those complicated layers to understand what actually makes the United States tick on a deep psychological level. So let's just dive right in.
To get us started, we really have to ask a foundational question here. Why do Americans value independence so strongly? Asking this shifts us from just, passively observing a culture to actively analyzing it. We see this fierce independence literally everywhere, from cutthroat corporate boardrooms to just everyday daily life. But where does it actually come from?
And right alongside that, we have to ask a second question. Why is success such an incredibly important part of the culture? The American mindset is just full of these wild paradoxes. It's this constant balancing act between intense personal ambition and the absolute necessity to function in a massive, interconnected society.
Because let's be honest, the truth is, the American way of thinking is often demonstrably different from the rest of the world. And we're going to objectively break down exactly why that is today. We'll look at the specific psychological traits that contrast so sharply with other global cultures, the very things that make the American psychological profile so incredibly, and sure, sometimes frustratingly unique.
Section 1. The Foundation, the American Dream and Success.
So, the American dream is a deeply ingrained cultural pillar. Just listen to this phrase for a second. If you work hard enough, you can become anything. Now, this isn't just some catchy motivational poster hanging in an office. It is a generational message passed down directly from parent to child. Unlike societies that might put a heavy emphasis on social class or family lineage, American culture uses this specific belief to celebrate individual achievement. Basically, success is viewed as something you actively go out and earn.
And that actually leads to a really fascinating quirk in social interactions over there. In America, achievement is so frequently linked to personal identity that when you meet someone new, you are almost always asked, "What do you do?" rather than, "Who are you?" Career becomes inextricably tied to a person's self-worth. It creates an environment that heavily rewards productivity, and it just fuels immense ambition.
Now, of course, this pursuit has very tangible motivators, right? The typical rewards of success are things like promotions, higher salaries, bigger houses, better lifestyles. It is a highly motivating system. But there is a heavy psychological trade-off here. Psychologists warn that this constant forward pressure, that relentless need to always be moving up and, keeping up with the Joneses, it measurably increases stress and anxiety. And that's even for people who have already achieved a massive amount of success.
Section 2. Individualism, standing out from the crowd.
If there is a single psychological trait most closely associated with America, it is absolutely, undoubtedly, individualism. Take this phrase, which is something you'd hear from a typical American teacher. What makes you unique? From a very early age, American children are actively encouraged to think independently, form their own opinions, and even, get this, challenge authority. Standing out isn't just okay, it is the goal from day one.
Contrast this with a lot of other global cultures, where fitting harmoniously into the group is what's highly valued. In America, being different is exactly what gets celebrated. Now, this relentless emphasis on individuality is incredible for producing groundbreaking artists, inventors, and entrepreneurs. However, because success and failure are viewed as entirely individual responsibilities, this same mindset can lead to profound feelings of personal isolation when people start to struggle.
Section 3. The value of freedom. Freedom in the American psyche isn't just some legal framework written on a piece of paper. It is a very powerful, deeply rooted psychological attachment. If we look back at the 18th century, we see the establishment of foundational freedoms like speech and religion. Then, by the 20th century, this expanded heavily into championing personal expression. And now, moving into the 21st century, it manifests as this fierce demand for personal choice in literally all life goals. Americans just prefer making their own decisions, even if it means firmly rejecting pressure from society or completely disagreeing with the experts.
Moving to Section 4, the modern trap, consumerism and comparison.
So, what actually happens when these deeply individualistic, freedom-loving traits collide head-on with one of the world's largest consumer markets? Well, we get what psychologists call aspirational marketing. Just notice the connection here between the product and the emotional promise. A luxury car isn't just transportation. It promises the feeling of success. The latest phone? That represents status. Specific brands offer belonging.
Companies intentionally target feelings rather than facts because they understand that in this specific culture, the products you buy communicate your identity.
Which brings us to a really crucial psychological concept, social comparison theory. Basically, this is the tendency to determine our own personal worth based on how we stack up against the highlights of others. Understanding this theory is the absolute key to unlocking a major modern paradox of American life. It explains exactly why people have never been more digitally connected, yet constantly report feeling so incredibly lonely.
It essentially operates as a relentless cycle. Step 1. Constant exposure to other people's highlights on social media. The perfect vacations, the big awards, the flawless luxury lifestyles. Step 2. Your brain naturally engages in what's called upward comparison, measuring your messy reality against their perfectly curated best moments. And then Step 3. This inevitably leads to feelings of inadequacy. This digital friction creates very real dissatisfaction, even for people who are living perfectly normal, perfectly healthy lives.
Section 5. The binding agent, systemic optimism.
But hey, the American psyche isn't just pressure and comparison. Despite the heavy burdens of the relentless competition we were just talking about, Americans possess a deeply unifying optimism that kind of holds the whole thing together. Look at the fruits of this mindset. You have innovation, exploration, economic growth, massive risk-taking, and continuous personal reinvention. All of these incredible societal benefits stem directly from one unshakable belief: the idea that tomorrow can always be better than today.
In this systemic optimism fundamentally changes the definition of a setback. In a lot of cultures, failure is a permanent mark, right? It's something to be deeply ashamed of. But here, it is optimistically reframed as a necessary stepping stone. Failure is just part of the journey. That specific psychological trait is exactly what fuels the relentless pace of bold business creation and scientific breakthroughs we constantly see coming out of the US.
And finally, Section 6. Understanding the modern world. As we've seen today, the American psyche absolutely cannot be reduced to just one single trait. It is a highly complex, often paradoxical mixture of intense ambition, fierce individualism, and boundless optimism. And honestly, this matters to you no matter where you're watching from today. These psychological traits are influencing cultures far beyond America's borders. They are fundamentally shaping how our interconnected world works, how it votes, and how it shops.
Our source material leaves us with this beautifully impactful closing thought. The psychology of a nation is the story of its people. To truly understand a country's outputs, its products, its art, its policies, you first have to understand the deeply rooted psychological story that its people tell themselves every single day.
Which leaves us with one final question for you to consider right now. How do these American psychological traits influence your own worldview? Whether you live in the US or you're sitting halfway across the globe, how has this pervasive culture of individualism, success, and optimism shaped your personal goals and expectations? Really think about that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining me for this